Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
A brilliant, glorious, wonderful Independence Day to all of you. Please do accept my wishes. It's a great day as India steps into its 78th year of independence. There is a lot to do, a lot's been done. And as usual on Independence Day, the Prime Minister has spoken on the ramparts of the Red Fort in Delhi, Lal Killa in Delhi. As usual, I think barring maybe one odd, we have always given you a Kathak Letter episode looking at what the Prime Minister said, finding some highlights and also looking for some indicators for what might come in the coming years. However, the most important Independence Day speech is when it is the first in a new term. So we had 2014, 2019 and now 2024. So we have to remember first of all what is fundamentally different between the three. The first was Narendra Modi's rise as India's first leader with a full majority of his own, a small majority, but a full majority after 25 years. After 25 years of coalition rule, multiple coalition rules, this was the first full majority government, and there was that feeling of high euphoria of getting a full majority. Also, generally in the country, the mood was really upbeat because there was a full majority government and there was a fatigue with coalition governments. Although India had seen a coalition government survive for 2 full terms UPA. That said, 2019 was different in its own way because the same government had got re-elected and this time by a larger majority. This was a little bit different. This verdict was different from the previous one. 2014 verdict was about optimism, euphoria, going ahead, achhe din. 2019 verdict was about national security. That was a national security election. That's why when the Prime Minister spoke in 2014, he looked ahead. He also looked 10 years ahead in a particularly critical issue, and that was on what he called, I'm quoting from him, poison of casteism, communalism, regionalism, and discrimination based on social and economic issues, or discrimination on social and economic basis. He said that these have slowed down or held back our country for a long time. Let's declare moratorium on it for 10 years. Those 10 years are over. This is a speech after those 10 years. Those 10 years are over. Why he had sought moratorium for 10 years? Maybe he figured that in a diverse country like India, you can't have these things suspended forever. So he made a realistic demand. Now from 2014 we come to 2019. I told you it was a national security election because that's when Balakot, before that within the same term, the Uri attack, surgical strikes, etc. had taken place. Before that, Pulwama, Balakot, it was in the shadow of that the 2019 verdict came. It became a national security campaign as well. In fact, Prime Minister Modi, the incumbent then, seeking a second term, made that as the central point, as the pivot of his campaign. And that's why the first speech that came again within months of the new government being sworn in, the new government gets sworn in between May and June as usual, the first speech was also a national security speech in some ways because it talks in a big way about changes in the status of Kashmir, which had taken place on 5th of August, just 10 days before Independence Day, the basic writing down of Article 370 of our Constitution, 35A. And he said that this was done within 10 weeks of getting re-elected. He also talked about the change of triple talaq, of the abolition of triple talaq. Also, he said that in this country, if he could abolish sati pratha, the sati system, female feticide, child marriage, etc., 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 by couldn't we have abolished triple talaq, which leads to victimization of Muslim women? So once again, that was a triumphant note. And then there were some promises. Now, these were interesting promises. In the speech setting up the first term in 2014, there were also many new schemes announced which still endure. So, Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, Skill India, Digital India, Make in India, Swachh Bharat, Sansad Adarsh Gram Yojana, and Planning Commission abolition. All of this came in 2014. 2019, as I told you, there was the celebration over to 370, reading down of Article 370, abolition of 35A, and also the fact that triple talaq had now been made illegal, and also one very major step, that is the constitution of the Jal Shakti Ministry. That Jal Shakti Ministry was also an amalgamation of multiple ministries: water resources and river development, Ganga rejuvenation, and drinking water and sanitation. All of these had been combined into one. So that was also a reform and a major step by a resurgent government now riding on the wave of a second mandate. Having said that, because I talked about water, as you know, this is 15th of August, we are working from home and I'm recording from home. So I see some shower building up. So if it does build up, we'll move under some shelter. So you might have one episode in two settings. Also, that setting is only about 5 meters away from where I stand right now. Many other ideas came up, and the reason I'm mentioning these is that some of these ideas have seen fruition. For example, one nation, one tax, that was GST, right? One nation, one energy grid, that mostly done as well. And these are non-controversial because GST, you might have other issues, but everybody wanted GST. Even the opposition might say this is flawed, this can be improved, but nobody says go back to the old system. Similarly, one nation, one mobility card pretty much has happened now with your FASTag cards. Then one nation, one election. He spoke about it then. That hasn't happened yet. He spoke about it today as well, but more in terms of saying we need to discuss it, because he now knows, and that reflected in his speech, that now he does not have the numbers to enforce that. Although he had expected that he was going to get an even bigger majority if it was a 400 par kind of situation, or anything like 360, 370 par, or even 350 par. Then that O and OE, as we called it, of one nation, one election might have been tried, but that is not happening right now, and that's the reason he's calling for more debate. Also, in the second speech, he had talked about population explosion. He said there is a population explosion, which is a big problem. Some people are, however, smart and they are sensible and they are not adding more babies to their families without being sure that they can look after them. Learn from them that population talk has now disappeared, partly because globally now, particularly among developed countries and also fast developing countries, of which India is the fastest, because the situation is now changed. Across the world, among developed countries, a baby bust, the fact that population is declining or not growing, is a big crisis. In China, it's a very big crisis, right? Western world, Europe, Russia, terrible crisis, population not growing. America, population growth rate has come down. Americans make up for it partly because of immigration. Those things India doesn't want. So I think he's also responding to that situation by staying silent on the population issue. In fact, you would find that his government also in the last few years has stayed silent on the population issue, barring somebody in Rajasthan, a Rajasthan chief minister talking about it. And those things are done usually to make an insinuation that it's the Muslim community that's producing too many babies, as the Hindus and others have cut down. So this might lead to a population imbalance, to which it's an opinion point from me, and it's a point I've repeated often. A simple solution is, please hold that decennial census, because our last census was 2011. 2021 was not held on the pretext that there was the COVID that year, Delta wave was there, but it doesn't look like a big preparation had been made already for that census. And since then, there's been no talk of the census, but there are projections. So government knows that population right now, population growth is not such an immediate issue. In fact, very soon, India will start worrying about the problem of an aging population. That said, how have we moved from there to now? Because this is the 11th Independence Day address by the same Prime Minister. This is only the third Prime Minister in India's history to deliver more than 10. Nehru, of course, delivered Independence Day speeches on more occasions continuously. Indira Gandhi's tenures were broken. They were broken by the post-emergency Janata government. That's why on the continuous basis, the 11th by Prime Minister Narendra Modi is the highest number for any Prime Minister, the second highest number for any Prime Minister after Jawaharlal Nehru. That is why it's important to see how his view of governance, how his view of politics, how his promises and how his claims have moved. This speech today was in fact the most subdued in a way, because the first one was euphoric. It was enjoying a big victory. He was riding on the crest of a majority after 25 years and setting the agenda for the future, knowing that he had a majority. That was the most optimistic of the openings for a BJP government, for a Modi government. The second, as I said earlier, was a national security election. That was again euphoric in a different way. That's India has arrived. We are a muscular nation. हम घर में घुस के मारते हैं. We punish those who indulge in terrorism on our territory. We are a strong nation. So it was done on that basis. Third one, however, I'm searching for an adjective, because compared to the other two, it might sound subdued, but subdued is not the right adjective. Perhaps the more apt adjective is that it is calmer. It is the calmest of the three. So first of all, there is congratulations for people of India. Also claims of successes for his own government, for the building of new infrastructure, railways, roads, airports, the 2 lakh panchayats having been connected with optical fiber, Bijli, Pani, gas, getting saturated. And then he makes a very interesting point, and that's one of the highlights. He says that once things like Bijli, Pani, gas, availability of this becomes saturated, this by itself becomes a reflection of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. I am interpreting that. He did not use it right there. He said what this means is, once there is saturation of the availability of Bijli, Pani, gas and facilities like that, then Jaat, Path, Mat, Panth, that is caste, creed, religion, everything, caste, creed, belief, religion, ideology, all of that vanishes, because there is such saturation of the availability of this welfare that it reaches everywhere. Now, our political editor, D.K. Singh, has given me a little count on the key words used. So, the word reform has been used the most times. It's been used 27 times. However, this time there is no specific reform promised, unlike 2014 and 2019. So maybe the Prime Minister means that I will continue doing what he's doing. However, he's saying some philosophical things like there are more than 3 lakh organizations in the country, from Panchayat to Zilla Parishads to etc., etc. If each one carries out 2 reforms per year, then in 5 years you will have so many million reforms and all citizens will feel better. That's a bit of a philosophical point, but he's not promising any specific reform. So 27 times reform. What comes next is important. So just after reform, 25 times he uses the word youth. What is the third most used word? That is skill or skill. So youth 25 times, skill or skilled 17 times, employment or jobs 15 times. You can add them all together, because youth, employment and skill, they are all together. Youth, employment, skilling, they all go together. So that is 25 and 17, 42 and 15, 57 times. These 3 connected issues are mentioned in this speech. Women feature 14 times and farmers 16 times. However, there is no major change promised, not even in the way the cabinet is constituted. I told you that in 2019, Ministry of Jal Shakti was created, merging so many diverse ministries dealing with different aspects of water. Even in 2014, the Agriculture Ministry was expanded to agriculture and farmers' welfare. It was also the year when in the opening speech itself, Planning Commission had been abolished. There is no such thing in today's speech. He talks about some other issues like depletion of soil quality and suggests that more farmers move towards organic farming. I just hope that doesn't become a very aggressive government policy, because we've seen the result of something like that being done in Sri Lanka. However, he talks about crimes against women, which is a very current issue. He doesn't go specifically into what's happened in Kolkata, but he says that the guilty are punished, but when the crime is done, crime gets a lot of media built up. When the guilty are punished, the media doesn't cover it so well. So maybe the media should cover it a lot more so people know that this is being done. Then he comes to the more political aspects of this speech, which are very interesting and unusual, because he hasn't spoken like this in the past. The first was very optimistic, 2014, where he said all parties should come together, let's give a moratorium of 10 years to all divisive issues, etc., etc. And we've reached this stage because of the contribution of all the prime ministers who were there before me and all the parties that constitute this parliament, etc. No such thing right now. Not those gloves are off. He says that there are still some forces in the country, some forces and some individual who do not have the same belief system that India's progress is good for us, India's growth is good for us. They do not share the view that their interest lies in India's interest, कि भारत के भले में उनका भला है. जब तक स्वयं का भला ना हो, until their own self-interest is served, they don't see any gain for them. They don't see any gain. Until their self-interest is served, their narrow self-interest is served, they don't see such a stake in India's growth. And he says, ये एक विकृत मानसिकता है. This is, you can say, a distorted state of mind, or you can also say a perverted state of mind. You can choose your description. And he says, this is where the roots of destruction and anarchy lie. He says, उनकी गोद में विकृति पल रही है. That perversion is growing in their laps. And then he gets to something which we haven't heard from him in the past, not yet. Although we've heard this from some of his predecessors, from Indira Gandhi in the past, who talked of the foreign hand, and also Rajiv Gandhi in his later years when he was in a crisis, he was under pressure, and he pointed to these dark foreign powers and he said, उनको हम नानी याद दिला देंगे. I'm just taking you back to that. He's not used any such expression, but he says that there are those inside and outside from whom India faces challenges. And he says there are powers across the world, or the big powers, who do not like a growing India. They see growing India as a threat, and he says, please don't see growing India as a threat. A growing India is not a threat to anybody. He says, ये बुद्ध का देश है, युद्ध का देश नहीं है, which means it's a country of Buddha. Buddha brought the message of peace. It's not a country that wages war. And that is why he's telling the same dark international powers, whoever they are, अकलमंद को इशारा काफ़ी है, that don't indulge in such machinations. कि आप ऐसी चालबाजियां मत कीजिए, this will not work, this is not correct, and you don't need it because we are not a threat to you. Then he comes to other operational political aspects of the speech. First of all, he is aware that he is facing criticism for jailing so many political leaders and rivals. So he says, these termites of corruption have been eating up our system. I have waged a war on corruption, and this will not subside. This war will not subside. Whatever the price that I pay in terms of my reputation and in terms of what is thrown at me, he said, I want to create an atmosphere of fear. Now that's an interesting expression. I'm translating from Hindi, Bhai ka Vatavaran, because the charge against him is that he and his agencies have created Bhai ka Vatavaran, an atmosphere of fear. So he says, I will continue doing what I'm doing because I want to create an atmosphere of fear for those who are corrupt. And he says, I don't accept this situation, and people of India should not accept a situation where the corrupt are glorified. So I will use some exact words from him. जहाँ भ्रष्टाचार का महिमा मंडन होता है, where the corrupt are glorified, वहाँ भ्रष्टाचार की स्वीकार्यता बढ़ाने का प्रयत्न होता है, where acceptance of corruption, where efforts are being made to increase the acceptability of corruption, और जहां भ्रष्ट लोगों का जय जयकार होता है, again where the corrupt leaders are glorified. He says, in fact, I want to create a psychology where corruption is abhorred and not glorified. So this is a battle of abhorrence of corruption versus glorification. And then again, interestingly, it's a political point also, there is a sizable tribute played to the Constitution. You remember the Constitution became such a big issue in the previous election, and he is conscious of that, and he's once again praising the Constitution, and he's saying next year the Constitution will be 75 years old. Of course, he reminds the citizens of fundamental duties in the Constitution, which, by the way, was inserted by Mrs. Gandhi in 1976 through her parliament, illegitimate parliament, in its extended term, same set of amendments which had inserted the words secular and socialist in the preamble of our constitution. So he swears by those fundamental duties. At the same time, he says the framers of the constitution also had a dream about universal civil code. Now he no longer says universal civil code. He says a secular civil code. And he says so far for 75 years, India has lived under a communal civil code, which means people of different faiths can have different civil codes. So, and he makes a mention of the Supreme Court with the Chief Justice and his wife sitting there. And he says even the Supreme Court has nudged us several times to move towards a universal civil code, which again he does not project as universal civil code, common civil code, secular civil code. Now, once again, he's not saying that he's going to bring that in. He also understands the numbers in parliament now and how the numbers might change as the composition of Rajya Sabha changes over time. But he says a discussion has to start on this. So you can see that this is now being set up as a strong campaign point for him going ahead. That said, the last political point he makes, and very interesting one, that's against dynastic culture in national politics. And he says that how come so many bright young people are not able to come into politics? And he then points out to young members of an organization called My Bharat, who are sitting there watching his speech. And he says, look at that organization, My Bharat. It's a wonderful organization that is now producing at least 1 lakh young people who are trained for politics. They can go into any political party. The basic criteria for their selection is that nobody in their family, no parent, no sibling, no uncle, no aunt, no mama, no mommy, no chacha, no chachi, nobody should be involved in politics. And that way, we'll democratize politics in this country. So you can see important pointers there. So once again, to sum up, the political messages in this speech, number one, an attack on the opposition over negativity, over efforts to create anarchy. Remember that Spiro Agnew, the once Vice President of the US, who used the expression nattering nabobs of negativity, right? A little bit like that, that all those who are opposed to me are nattering nabobs of negativity, and that demoralizes the country and creates condition of anarchy. That's one. Second is glorification of corruption. So he's obviously referring to those political leaders among his rivals who are facing corruption cases or who might be in jail still. Third, he's attacking dynastic culture. And remember, when he's talking about dynastic culture and his plan to bring in these 1 lakh young people who have nobody anywhere in their families in politics, he wants to bring them into politics. And he says, irrespective of which party they join. And while he's making this elaborate point against dynastic politics, need to get more talent in politics, and what he is doing by getting these 1 lakh young people into various political parties, 1 lakh young people who come from families with no connection, not even a remote connection to politics, the Doordarshan camera switches to Rahul Gandhi and focuses there. Well timed, you might say, perfectly timed, you might say, but we can also say, as I had said earlier, for a wise watcher of Indian politics, just a little signal is enough.